4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Welcome to our extraordinary, smart, savvy audience that wants to hear something other than the usual punditry on television and other outlets. We're going to talk about something very, very serious tonight, and that is violations of the law of war, violation of U.S. law, and careless actions that put our American troops in potential jeopardy. These are just two of the reasons why the worst Secretary of Defense, by far, in the history of the country, Pete Hegseth, must go. It should not be an issue anymore. It should be a foregone conclusion.
I agree with you, Dad. Before we get into that, I want to give some shout outs to some people in the chat. Anthony, CT's Finest, who's our mod. Scott Talter, President Colletti, Michael Sheffield, Susan Clark, Donaboo, Wet Cans, Robert Langston, Maz, I Am Not Your Cat. A lot of awesome people in the chat. Pam is here. Suzanne AP is here. A lot of really awesome people in the chat. I guarantee you Jake Tapper is not shouting you out on his show.
Probably not.
Probably not. All right, let's get into our first topic of the night, which is the boat strike news. Here's the latest update. Navy Admiral. Let me start that again. Navy Admiral Frank Bradley, the commander who oversaw the September 2nd strikes on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean, has testified before the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee. The Admiral denied Hegseth gave a, quote, kill everybody order in his briefing to lawmakers. Lawmakers left the briefing with mixed reactions along party lines. Rep. Jim Himes of Connecticut, the senior Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, said after the briefing, quote, I reviewed the strike video and it's deeply, deeply troubling. Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, told reporters after the Thursday closed door that these were, quote, righteous strikes. Quite a stark difference, Dad.
Yeah, this is Admiral Bradley's Colin Powell moment. Admiral Bradley is no Colin Powell. Colin Powell was one of the most revered and admired figures in recent American history. I was one of his great admirers. I actually thought, that he could become president of the United States. And then he torpedoed his own reputation, his own standing, by going before the UN and advocating for the disastrous invasion of Iraq based upon exaggerated and faulty intelligence. I was one of the first to comment on that right after his appearance, and I compared it to Adlai Stevenson, the UN ambassador's appearance when they discovered the missiles in Cuba. And I said, Stevenson had photos. Colin Powell had cartoons. It was just a horrific moment. This is the Colin Powell moment for Bradley, who isn't anywhere near the stature. I never heard of him, frankly. Have you, Sam?
No.
But, those who know him attest to his integrity, his competence. And here he comes before the United States Congress to defend the indefensible, the killing of two survivors of an initial strike that blew the boat apart. No one suggests that this boat was operational. Apparently it was blown in half. It was such a horrendous hit that Pete Hegseth said, I couldn't even see what was going on. It was so much smoke and fire. It was the fog of war. And so you got these two pathetic survivors clinging to the side of the boat. And after 41 minutes of delay, plenty of time to get a helicopter in there to intercept them, which they did later in later strikes. He decides, either on his own, who knows, we may never know, to blow up the boat again and kill the survivors. This is directly contrary to the law of war. You cannot kill survivors of a shipwreck who pose no threat to you. It's also contrary to American law. You cannot kill individuals who pose no threat to you on the grounds of, they may commit a future crime, as absurd as it was. Somehow they were going to get back on the ship, sail half the boat to the United States, unload the drugs, even though we're in total surveillance by the American Navy. What possible threat could these two have posed? And Sam, I have not heard this anywhere, but there is a direct precedent demonstrating that Bradley and his superior Hegseth committed a heinous war crime.
Whoa.
This is the famous Peleus, that's Peleus, something no one's ever heard of, the famous Peleus incident during World War II. Peleus was a Greek freighter conscripted by the British Ministry of Transport. So it was a belligerent ship. It wasn't necessarily a fighting ship, but it was a belligerent ship because it was carrying supplies on behalf of the British, who were then engaged in this horrific war with the Germans, right? You didn't have to come up with some convoluted, unsubstantiated claim that the persons on these boats, in the Caribbean or in the Pacific were at war with the United States. There was a war, the worst war in history going on, and the British and the Germans were in the midst of it. Well, in 1944, a U-boat fired torpedoes against the Peleus, the freighter working with the British Ministry of Transport, and basically blew the freighter apart, much like what happened in the Caribbean with the first strike on this little boat. And there were quite a number of survivors, though, out of the 35 crew, clinging to pieces of wreckage. Instead of rescuing them, do you know what the commander and other officers on the submarine did?
I'm guessing they killed them.
They killed all but 3 of them, raking them with machine gun fire and grenades in a deliberate attempt to kill all of the survivors who posed absolutely no threat to anyone on the submarine or the integrity of the submarine itself. Well, the Germans on the submarine were apprehended and tried by a British court and charged with committing a war crime by killing most of the survivors. 5 members of the German crew were on trial. And you know what their argument was, Sam? They had 2 of them. One was summarily dismissed. We were just following orders. As the judge advocate found, that's no excuse. You cannot follow blatantly illegal orders. And in fact, he said, there's no complication here of international law. It is a fundamental usage of war that the killing of unarmed enemies was forbidden as a result of the experience of civilized nations through many centuries. To fire so as to kill helpless survivors of a torpedoed ship was a grave breach of the law of the nations. The right to punish persons who broke such rules of law had clearly been recognized for many years. In light of this, the judge advocate also dismissed the second excuse, that we had to kill everybody to make sure that they would not go off and tell the location of the submarine, or if they were picked up in the waters, our enemies would see the location of the submarine. That argument, similar but much stronger than the arguments being made by General Bradley and Pete Hegseth, much stronger. This is action in World War II, the most brutal war in the history of the world. The judge advocate dismissed that as well. The question whether or not a belligerent is entitled to kill an unarmed person for the purpose of saving his own life has been the subject of much discussion. It may be that such circumstances, to save one's own life, could arise in which a killing might be justified. But the court had to consider the facts that emerged from the evidence of this case. That is, there was no danger. The submarine commander and his boat had no possible justifications of self-defense. The judge advocate said, "It's quite obvious that no sailor and no soldier can carry with him a library of international law or have immediate access to a professor on that subject who can tell him whether or not a particular command is a lawful one. However, in this case, it does not involve complex questions of international law as to whether or not the command to fire at helpless survivors struggling in the water was lawful. You might well think it would not be fair to hold any of the subordinates accused in this case responsible for what they are alleged to have done. But it is fairly obvious to you that if in fact the carrying out of X command, he was the commander, involved the killing of helpless survivors, it was not a lawful command, and it must have been obvious to the most rudimentary intelligence that it was not a lawful command. And those who did the shooting are not to be excused for any claim for doing it on the ground of superior officers. You know what the verdict was of the 5 men who were tried?
War criminals.
All were found to be war criminals. 3 of them were sentenced to death and executed.
Oh my God, really?
Sentenced to death and executed.
Huh.
In a much less clear situation than that of the blowing up of the 2 survivors on that boat. It's the middle of World War II. Germany and Britain were fighting to the death. There is no question that the boat was involved in working on behalf of the British war machine. And in fact, the court said, we are not accusing you of torpedoing the boat. That was an act of war. You were within your rights to torpedo a ship being used by the British to supply their troops who are fighting the Germans. The war crime occurred afterwards when you killed the helpless, shipwrecked survivors clinging to the wreckage of the boat. Almost exact parallels to what happened in the Caribbean. And none of the excuses that have been given could possibly fly. They were going to right the boat. They were going to, somehow, despite being under the constant surveillance of the U.S. Navy, sail it to the United States and offload the drugs. Much weaker justifications than the Germans had, which is, hey, we don't want to broadcast our location because British destroyers will come and kill us. Well, there's no question of anyone being in danger of being killed as a result of what was going on in the Caribbean, and yet all of those Germans who fired on the survivors were guilty of war crimes, and 3 of them were executed.
Wow, that's a pretty incredible story, Dad. Thanks for sharing that.
And I have not heard that anywhere.
Well, you're the historian guy.
I'm the historian.
You're the expert here, so that's why no one's heard it, except for here on Lichtman Live. I guarantee you, Ari Melber is not giving you that story on his show tonight.
Unless he watches us.
Unless he watches us.
The only time you'll hear that story is if someone picks it up by watching us.
I'm getting a little bit worried, though, that this boat strike story is the waters are getting muddied a little bit too much for the average person to be following what's happening. You know, we've got strikes in the Caribbean. We've got one strike. We've got two strikes. Now, you know, who ordered the strike? Was Hegseth in the room? Was he not in the room? What did Adam? You know, it's getting. I fear it's getting a little bit convoluted. Obviously, the Trump administration is doing that on purpose.
That's their MO. That's what they do, right?
Right.
Delay, obstruct, attack. That's what they do. Obfuscate. But I think one of the reasons I brought up this story, it's dead simple in some ways.
Right.
Take all the complications out of it. It is a war crime to kill helpless survivors of a disabled boat.
And, you know, I hear people justifying killing them by saying, oh, they were drug traffickers, they were drug runners. And show me which law in the United States makes a drug trafficker or a drug runner if they get the death penalty. In this country, even horrific drug traffickers get due process, they get lawyer, they get a judge, and then they get a sentence. They don't get put to death because of it. Yeah. I'm not justifying drug traffickers. I'm just saying.
No, of course not. You can't summarily execute people because you think they're a drug trafficker.
Right,
much less even if you could prove they were a drug trafficker. And and you know, in the situation in World War II, no question, the survivors were acting against Germany, right?
Yeah.
Far more direct threat than, you know, these supposed drug runners. And by the way, I'm not an authority on the war on drugs, except I know it's been going on for umpteen decades and done no good. But authorities have said you're not going to make a dent in drug trafficking by blowing up these boats. In fact, you may make the situation worse because, number one, other nations aren't going to want to cooperate with you. And there's been reports that the British have stopped cooperating, and international cooperation is essential for stopping the drug trafficking. Two, by killing everybody, you don't have anyone you can question. There's no way you can, you know, kind of move up the scale. Three, the fentanyl, which, you know, Trump says is killing everyone, doesn't come on these boats. Doesn't come from Venezuela, right? Comes from Colombia and Mexico in other ways. So even if you said, well, there might be some justification if they were, you know, running drugs and killing Americans with fentanyl. Just like so many other things in the war on drugs, this appears to be, even if you take at face value their justification, totally counterproductive. Right.
Anything more on the strikes, or do you want to get into the Inspector General report?
Just one quick thing.
Okay.
You know, how many times have they changed their story? Right? First, you know, I think it was the Post reports that Hegseth said, kill them all. And they denied that there was even a second strike. Much later, they've also consistently denied that Hegseth said that. We'll never know unless there's some recording. But they even denied there was a second strike. And then it was proven there was a second strike. We have to admit there was another strike. In fact, there might have been several follow-up strikes. And then Hegseth said, well, I followed it all and it was all just fine. And then Hegseth said, oh, I didn't really see it. You know, there was the fog of war, totally inappropriate claim. You know, you could have waited till the smoke cleared. It wasn't that long and you would have seen exactly what was going on.
Isn't the fog of war in reference to deciding what to do in the scope of an entire war and how confusing it can get? Not about the literal fog or the smoke,
which would clear up in a few minutes.
That's so stupid.
But of course he said, well, I was out to lunch. Well, said I had to go to another meeting. What could be more important? We don't even know what that meeting was because Hegseth hasn't testified. They haven't given us any information. And this is the typical MO. Again, obstruct, deny, delay, provide no reliable information.
All right, our next topic. Again, more Hegseth drama. This guy is in deep shit.
This was an independent report.
Wait, let me intro it.
I'm jumping the gun here.
Yep, you're jumping the gun as per usual. And you always do that. A new Inspector General report finds Pete Hegseth abused his authority, blurred military and political roles, and mishandled sensitive communications when he and other top officials put imminent military operations against the Houthis in Yemen in a Signal chat back in March 2025.
This is truly Orwellian. The independent Inspector General found that Hegseth had indeed disclosed operational, detailed plans to attack Yemen on an unsecured, unapproved communication device. What's it called, Sam? The Signal.
Signal is an app, and you can do simple messaging through the Signal app.
It's not secured. It's not approved by the military.
Correct.
And they concluded, as a result, if this information had fallen into the hands, I'm quoting, of U.S. adversaries, Houthi forces, the forces were attacking in Yemen, might have been able to counter U.S. forces or reposition personnel and assets to avoid planned U.S. strikes. Even though these events did not ultimately occur, the Secretary's actions created a risk to operational security that could have resulted in failed U.S. mission objectives and potential harm to U.S. pilots. In what is truly an Orwellian response, Hegseth and his spokesperson says, total exoneration. Total exoneration.
What a dumbass.
No classified information shared. Well, two things about that. One, the information that the secretary entered into the chat from the U.S. command detailing the types of aircraft, launch times, and strike times for the operation. According to the report, the operational movement should be classified as secret. That's how it came out of the Central Command at one of the highest levels of secrecy. Now, it is true that Hegseth had the authority to declassify it. But 2 points about that. One, there's no record of his declassifying. It's like Donald Trump claiming, I thought in my head it was going to be declassified, and so it was. Utter nonsense. Secondly, if he had in fact declassified it, it would have been one of the most irresponsible acts by a Secretary of Defense in history. Why in the world would you declassify detailed plans for a military operation prior to that operation taking place?
It's nonsensical. Let's be honest.
It's nonsensical. Third, it makes no difference whether it was classified or not. As the report said, it didn't hinge on the classification. It hinged on the content, right, Sam, of what was released. And it is the content that created a risk that could have resulted in a failed mission and potential harms to U.S. pilots. So the classification status, had absolutely nothing to do with the findings. And by the way, who was one of those who blasted Hillary Clinton for using an unsecured server while she was Secretary of State, even though no military information was shared on it? Pete Hegseth.
Oh, well, of course, yeah.
Of course, along with other Republicans. Consistency, you'll never get it from this crew.
And, we're seeing, all these people who fell for Trump's line of, we're going to stop all military foreign involvement. Now, we've seen the Houthis attack in Yemen. Now we're seeing Venezuela. We saw Iran earlier in his tenure.
Attacks on the boats in international waters.
And I still don't get why people fell for that, because even in his first administration, there was not a major war that he entered the U.S. into, but here are just some foreign conflicts that he either verbally was invested in, or militarily or financially was invested in. Iran with the Soleimani strike, North Korea, his fire and fury rhetoric against the leader of North Korea, strikes in Syria, anti-ISIS operations in Iraq, increased support of the Saudi campaign in Yemen. Again, these people who are like, oh, Trump's all about not getting involved in foreign conflicts. And it's like, those were not massive stories. So I get why it didn't hit the zeitgeist of the country entirely. But again, you do about 15 seconds of research and you can see that Trump and his administration have never been about avoiding foreign conflicts. And we're seeing it more and more as we now enter into this Venezuela period. And it seems pretty obvious to all of us that it's all about oil.
Yes. I was going to give a 3-word answer, oil.
I knew you were going to say that. That's why I said oil.
How much time do we have? What time is it?
It's 9:29.
All right. Next topic.
Okay. You ready for the next topic?
I'm always ready.
The Supreme Court will allow Texas to use its heavily gerrymandered congressional map, a ruling that could give Republicans up to 5 more House seats.
Were you surprised, Sam?
I didn't even know it was coming, to be honest.
Yeah. Here's what happened. I can't talk about the substance because I'm an expert in some of these cases, but I can at least...
expert witness, to clarify.
Expert witness, right. I can at least give a quick summary. So, Donald Trump, way back in the middle of this year, said, we've got to redistrict to get Republicans more seats, and pressured Governor Abbott of Texas to begin that process. Didn't take much pressuring. And so they, in the summer of 2025, called a special session and gerrymandered an already heavily gerrymandered map to give Republicans more seats. Allegedly 5 more seats. We'll see. You never know. But that was the objective. And I think it was finally passed and signed in August of 2025. A 3-judge court reviewed the plan and found it was an unconstitutional racial gerrymander, with the opinion written by a judge appointed by Donald Trump. The decision was paused by Justice Alito, who's assigned to that circuit, and the Supreme Court, in one of these rocket docket opinions, without full consideration, overturned the 3-judge court opinion and said Texas must use the new gerrymandered map because it was a political gerrymander, not a racial gerrymander. They also made the argument that you don't want to change things too close to an election. Wait a minute. They didn't pass this thing until August. The plaintiffs moved as fast as you possibly can. So you're rewarding a state for passing something as late as possible, and then when it gets overturned, you're saying sorry, it's too late.
And
that's just inexplicable.
And aren't they just asking to go back to the old districts? It's not like no. I'm saying it wouldn't be like the change would make things all crazy and confusing for people. They would go back to the old districts.
Yes, you go back to the districts that have been people using for many years. I can't even imagine. People were so closely following the special session that they all figured out what their new districts were going to be.
Right.
What were the chances of that? 0.
No, even people. I mean, we're both pretty locked into political elections and politics. I would have no idea if districts that we live in change this way or that way.
Yeah, we would know when we got our,
I
postcards in the mail.
I couldn't look at a map and be like, oh, this has changed and that line has changed.
That's such nonsense.
Yeah, you'd have to be like literally an elections district expert, to memorize.
Maybe 1 out of 1,000 voters, parsed the new districts as compared to their old and figured out where they were.
So does this mean now that California can just go ahead with Prop 50?
No.
It doesn't?
No.
What? I'm so confused.
The California redistricting is a separate case. Now, if the courts are consistent, of course, they should apply the same standard to the California redistricting and not block it. But that presumes the courts are going to act consistently.
Right. And you're saying don't count on it?
I don't think they'll shoot down the California redistricting, but as I said, I'm not in the business of predicting what the Supreme Court is going to do.
Right. Dad, the U.S. has halted all immigration and citizenship cases for nationals from 19 different countries, leaving thousands in limbo as the administration reviews, quote, security risks.
This is, I'm continually at a loss for words. Every time I think they can't go lower, they go lower. We had one act committed by one individual who was vetted and brought in by what administration, Sam?
I don't know. I've lost track.
Administration, right?
Well, I thought that he came in initially through the Biden administration, and then he was granted asylum through the Trump administration.
I think that's probably right, but vetted by the Trump administration to be allowed to stay. If he wasn't granted the asylum from the Trump administration, he wouldn't be here. One individual commits one murder. How many murders, gun murders? How many gun murders a day are there in America?
I don't know.
Over 40 a day in America. So you got one very disturbed individual who people warned about committing a murder, and you, as a result of that, discriminate against people in 19 countries. It's absolutely insane from any kind of rational, logical point of view. It's just an excuse for Trump to clamp down, not on all immigration, but what do these 19 countries have in common?
I'm guessing they're black and brown countries.
They're black and brown and Muslim countries. You don't see any predominantly white Christian countries being included. But of course, a deranged act by one person means everyone in Muslim and non-white countries is tainted with guilt. You could find from gun murders, from gunning down police. A police official is shot every single day in America. And Trump was warned, you put National Guard on the streets, they'll be targets, just like police officers are targets. But to, discriminate against, very selectively, against people from 19 countries based on this single act just staggers the imagination and is so obvious that it's nothing more than a pretext for Trump's prejudices.
Big breaking news broke today. What is it? December 4th. Officials say a fresh review of evidence has led to an arrest in the long unsolved DC, DNC, RNC pipe bomb case from January 2021.
Yeah, and I think,
Was that January 2021? Yes.
Yeah. I think the Trump administration has an absolute right to take credit for it, but they can't help themselves. The Department of Justice is not supposed to be a political organization. Its oath is not to Donald Trump and his politics. It's to the Constitution. And guess what she did, Sam?
Bondi made it political.
She immediately made it political. Say, look at the great things we're doing while the Biden administration sat for 4 years and did absolutely nothing. An absolute lie. I refer you to the January 2nd, 2025 memorandum from the Department of Justice. Who was president on January 2nd, 2025?
Donald Trump.
Nope.
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden. This was the Biden Justice Department, in which they reported statistics on an extensive, exhaustive investigation, including interviewing more than 1,000 witnesses and following up more than 600 leads. And who knows to what extent what the successor DOJ has done was built upon all that work done by the Biden administration. We'll never know. Of course, they'll never tell us. But, they lie, as always. Oh, the Biden administration just sat for 4 years and did absolutely nothing. And then we came in and we're great heroes and we found this guy. The other thing, as far as I know, this guy, who they apprehended, blows away all these extreme right-wing theories that these bombs were planted by an FBI informant designed, to pin something on Trump and his followers. It does not appear that he has any linkage to any law enforcement in the Biden administration.
All right, with that, we will move on to our question portion of the show. Before we do that, some quick housekeeping. We have almost 900 people watching, but only 300 likes. Make sure you like the stream. It helps us a lot. I think last time I checked, we were about 20 subscribers away from hitting 176,000 subscribers. So if you're watching, you're not subscribed, help us hit 176,000 subscribers. We're about 20 away. I'm trying to do the announcements and deal with his water at the same time.
I thought you had 4 hands.
I do not have 4 hands.
Oh, Kiko does.
Zagros just said, I liked. Jim Blower says, I see only 1 like my own. Well, I'm seeing about 350 now, but don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. Remember that members and donators get priority on the question portion of this period.
And really helps us out. There's a lot behind the scenes. You see all this research.
Wow.
Plus,
you do a lot of research,
all the
man.
technical operations that Sam does to keep this up. So, we don't have a regular stream of income. We depend upon our members and our donators.
I don't know what you mean by we don't have a regular stream of income, but
we don't have some, rich person, providing us with a grant to run this.
Correct.
That's what I mean.
Yes, that is true. Tony Stark says,
we welcome that. If you're a rich person out there and want to give us $1 million to keep this going, we won't turn it down. You don't interfere with our independence.
Tony Stark says, liked and subbed. Thank you. Jeff Schumer says, I'm a new subscriber. Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate that.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. So our first question is from one of our members, Miles. They say, if Democrats retake the White House in 2028, would you advise them to pack the court if they can?
I don't know what pack the court means.
You
Do
don't?
you mean create additional judgeships?
I believe that's what they mean, yes.
Yeah, I don't think that's a wise idea. It'll just look like another war on the judiciary on a partisan basis. I think, obviously if they win the White House, they'll have an opportunity to pack the courts in, the traditional way by appointing judges and likely some Supreme Court justices as well. But I'm not a big advocate of court packing. I was not around when FDR tried to pack the court, but it was a disaster.
Who do you think could replace Hegseth? That's part of the issue. Even if he does leave or gets thrown out, I think Trump's just going to put another, loony loyalist. That's a good idea to call his cabinet members loony loyalists.
I love that. The loony loyalist cabinet.
Yeah, he's just going to put another loony loyalist.
LLC.
Yeah.
Loony loyalist cabinet.
That's pretty good.
Well, we saw that, and I predicted that, remember, with Matt Gaetz. I said Matt Gaetz is a feint. They're going to put in someone else like Pam Bondi, who's just as bad but doesn't have the same baggage. I fear if they could find someone like that, it's not so easy, that they would put in someone without the same baggage, but who would be just as bad.
They just glean from Fox News. It's not that hard. Like Fox News is.
I'm not sure if
is
they
their
just picked
incubator
someone from Fox News to replace Hegseth from Fox News that he'd get through. Hegseth barely got through.
Yeah.
Vance had to break the tie. I think if they picked another unqualified Fox News personality, that person would likely not get confirmed.
I hate to say it because I think he's one of the worst secretaries of defense ever, but I don't think Hegseth is going anywhere.
I disagree. I think.
What? Come on.
Here's the Trump MO. I love you. I'll support you until you become a liability, and then you're sunk.
He's been a liability since Signalgate. He's been a liability.
Is a lot worse.
Yeah, but they've already muddied the waters, and Bradley went in today and said, oh, Hegseth didn't do this, didn't do that.
I think
I
the
don't buy
American
it.
people are seeing, certainly a lot of senators are seeing through that, not just Democrats, but a bunch of Republicans as well.
All right. Do you want to make a bet with me?
Take a poll.
All right. What's the poll? Will Hegseth be out
in the next 6 months?
In the next 6, and so you're saying he's gone in the next 6 months?
Oh, I'm saying he's done in the next 2 months.
Right. Okay.
Let's tighten it.
2 months?
2 months.
Let's give 6 months because, I mean, you know.
All right. It takes a while to get him out.
Yeah.
Will Hegseth be out in the next 6 months?
Okay.
Do you believe Lichtman or Lichtman?
Right. Keep talking.
All right. So, as I said, it's not going to be that easy to find someone as bad as Hegseth. A, because, you know, you have a limited pool, and B, a lot of even Republicans feel burned by this. This is not helping the Republican brand, even if they manage to obfuscate it.
A $70 Australian donation from our good friend and our benefactor. We do have a benefactor. His name is George Politis.
Yes, he's a great guy.
Yes, he's always giving us
nice Aussie dollars.
Aussie dollars. Aussie. Oi, oi, oi.
I'm not saying that.
Why not?
Just move on.
They asked, do you think Hegseth is doing this to scare off people from coming to America because Trump doesn't want immigrants coming over?
I don't think Hegseth is that smart. I think this is who he is. You know, if you look at his background, he's never had any respect for the law of war or any laws. He believes basically these lethal warriors from the Department of War, not Defense, should be pretty much free to do anything that they want and not be restrained in any way. So I think this is his MO. This is who he is. Yeah. And plus, he's totally incompetent. He ran some small operations. I think they might have been charities or small businesses, and was terrible at them. And now he's running, you know, one of the biggest operations in the world.
I think this has everything to do with increasing their war on drugs and increasing the justification to possibly involve themselves militarily in Venezuela.
Yes.
Those are the two
but
reasons.
But it is consistent with Hegseth's history.
Yeah. Member Alex Kawa says, turnout in the Tennessee special election was equivalent to what it was in the district from the 22 midterms.
Yes.
Given how Dems gained 13 points there, even given that fact, do you think this could be a signal for what's to come in 2026 midterms as a whole?
Yeah. One of the articles I pulled out talked about this.
Oh.
At some depth. What Tennessee revealed about the GOP's Trump trap in the midterms. Republican candidates face the problem that Trump alone gets out the vote they need. Of course, he also gets out Democratic votes, but he's much more important for getting at Republican votes. He's not entirely wrong that Republican candidates suffer when I'm not on the ballot. And he has, of course, has not been on the ballot in any special election. And there's a whole chart in this article in which they point out that this 13-point shift is not an anomaly.
No.
It's consistent with what happened in New Jersey, Virginia, in other special elections, including the two public service seats in Georgia. This kind of 10 to 15 point swing has been typical of the off-year elections. Does that mean, the article points out, it's necessarily going to swing like that when you get to more normal, regular cycle midterm elections? Not necessarily, but it's a real warning signal, the article points out, to Republicans. I think there are 70 seats, 70, that are less safe for Republicans than Tennessee 7.
Wow, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Diego, $10 donation, thank you. They say, question for the professor. Sir, we are taught the Electoral College was designed to keep men like Donald Trump from obtaining power. To me, it has been proven false if that is the case. Can we eliminate it?
I certainly agree with your critique of the Electoral College and have been a long-time advocate of abolishing the Electoral College and electing the president by popular vote. However, it's in the Constitution. And you know what it takes to amend the Constitution, Sam?
Tell the people, Dad.
A 2/3 vote from both houses of Congress and ratification by 3/4 of the states. You can't get 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of the states to agree on how to spell their names, much less on a major constitutional amendment.
Do you think we'll ever have another constitutional amendment ever again?
I'd be very skeptical, maybe in your lifetime, but not in mine. The last time we had one of consequence was way back in the early 70s, the 18-year-old vote. It's been, more than 50 years. There was another amendment having to do with congressional pay, and that's it. 27th Amendment. It's in this polarized politics, it's essentially impossible. How much time do we have?
It is 9:50 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We can take 4 or 5 more questions.
Oh, okay. There is a post show tonight, so stay tuned for that.
Aren't you lucky?
Yes. If you've never been part of the post show, you should join. This is from our member, Cara. They say, do you think Bill Clinton's NAFTA deal was bad for us and responsible for why the budget got balanced? Additionally, could this be some type of motive around Trump's dislike of him, obsession with him wanting to outdo him in terms of balancing it again by reversing trade partnerships with Mexico and Canada?
What do I say happens to my head when we deal with these trade issues? There is powerful arguments on both sides about NAFTA, and I'm in no position to adjudicate them. But I don't think NAFTA was responsible for the balancing of the budget. Two things. One, modest spending increases under Clinton, and arguably one of the 2 most booming periods of the economy in the history of the country. This was the digital revolution of personal computers, cell phones, and other digital equipment. And that was, along with the restrained spending, the driving force for the last time we balanced the budget. And Trump has innumerable reasons for hating Bill Clinton.
$10 donation from the Mad Hatter Forever. They say, right. Would the so-called, quote, America First admin use the Monroe Doctrine as justification for its actions with the boats, the military situation with Venezuela, and the billion-dollar bailout of Venezuela?
Look, they'll use anything. They claim these little boats are at war with the United States. Arrant nonsense. But the Monroe Doctrine doesn't really fit, although they could shoehorn anything. The Monroe Doctrine essentially says the Western Hemisphere is out of bounds for European powers. What's going on in Argentina, Venezuela, and the Caribbean is not an incursion by European powers. So the Monroe Doctrine doesn't apply here. You agree, Sam?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know enough about the Monroe Doctrine to say anything about that question.
Oh, that's big.
I'm going to be honest. Yeah, I'm just going to be honest. I'm going to be honest. This is from Dorian Ramirez. They say, will the Texas gerrymandered maps matter if the voters, especially Hispanics that are likely to swim back to the Dems, turn out and vote against Trump due to the broken promises and dissatisfaction?
It's a very important point and one I've made before. The danger with a gerrymander is, yes, you can create Republican districts, but there's only so many Republican votes, although there's a lot of them in Texas. But some of those districts are going to be shaved fairly thin. They may be likely or lean Republican, but if there is a blue wave, and that's certainly possible in 2026, it is also possible that some of those finely shaven Republican districts could go Democratic. That may be Pollyanna, that may not happen, but it's certainly at least a possibility. That's the downside politically of gerrymandering.
That makes sense. We'll do 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up for the evening. Remember that the Lichtman Live post show comes up on my channel right after this. So if you're sitting there going, oh no, it's over, it's not really over.
It's not over till it's over. Who said that?
Humphrey Bogart.
Yogi Berra. It ain't
I
over
almost
till
said.
it's
I
over.
swear, I almost said Yogi Berra. Damn it!
You were close.
That was close. Was foreign intervention in Libya justified if it removed a dictator but left the country unstable?
Probably not. There are dictators all over the world. And is it our responsibility to kill them, to overturn them, if it's not going to create a stable democratic country? Way back when Stormin' Norman Schwarzkopf in the Gulf War pushed the Iraqis out of Kuwait, the question was, do we march to Baghdad? The road was open to the general, topple Saddam Hussein. And the same people who are advocating a dozen years later for the invasion of Iraq said, no, it's not worth it, because you take out Saddam Hussein, you're going to have a country that's divided into three bitter parts, the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Shiites, fighting one another. And if we do that, we're going to own it. And Libya, by the way, remains a very bad example of taking out a dictator, however righteous that might seem. It's still a horrible, failed state.
$5 donation from Limited Light. They say, would it be possible to bring back office hours for the members? We don't have any plans to bring back office hours right now. That was sort of part of our old new format, but you never know. They could come back at some point.
We might do some specials for members.
Yeah, we might do some specials.
Certainly going to consider that, but we're not going to abandon the Lichtman Live Tuesday, Thursday. That seems to be doing really well, and we're going to try also to have more live events like we did covering the special election in Tennessee. $5
donation from Tina. They are quoting Admiral Hosey to their colleagues, who apparently said, quote, "I took an oath to the Constitution, not to a TV brand in a uniform." That's a pretty good one.
Yeah. All right.
With that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for this evening. The Lichtman Live post show comes up right after this. Oh, the poll. Forgot about the poll. Will Hegseth be out in the next 6 months? Folks in our chat have voted, and that 68% vote yes. 32% vote no.
There you go.
I am outvoted.
Voice of the people standing.
But I remember recently we had a similar vote like this, and we had different stances, and the audience backed you, but I ended up being right.
Oh, you are challenging your elder here?
I don't remember what it was for, though, now.
I don't remember that. At any rate.
Oh, okay. What are your final words to the people tonight, Dad?
It's not that complicated. When you boil it down, two things happened. Number one, whether it was classified or not, Hegseth shared operational details of a military operation on an unsecured, unapproved chat, which potentially endangered the operation and potentially endangered the lives of American Air Force personnel. End of story. Makes no difference whether that information was classified when he released it or when he put it on the chat or not. Simple story. Second, simple story. It is well established, just check out the Peleus case, that it is a serious war crime, even punishable by death, to execute shipwrecked survivors who pose no direct threat to you.
Ron Nolan said, the Department of War crimes. That's a pretty good one.
That's a good one.
And with that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for this evening. The Lichtman Live post show comes up right after this on my channel. Stick around for that. There are 800 people watching. I expect 799 people to be on the post show. Right, Dad?
We certainly hope so.
Hope show? We hope show that you'll be on the post show.
Yes.
Good night.
Good night.